Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Highest to Lowest, starring Denzel Washington, Jeffrey Wright, Elfinish Heldura, forgive me if I said that wrong, and ASAP Rocky, directed by Spike Lee. Now, this is a remake of a Kurosawa film. I forget, it's called High to Low or something like that. I forget the name of the movie, but it came out a long time ago, and not only that, I have watched Spike Lee's previous movie before he did this one called The Five Bloods, which not a great film, but I did enjoy it for what it was. It has its moments, but how well will this go? Let's get into the movie. In Brooklyn, New York, which looks beautiful as far as the shots are concerned, David King, played by Denzel Washington, is a rich record producer who talks with his client on the phone about why he pays someone who, as we never know who it is, and after he gets off the phone, he's greeted by his wife Pam, played by Elfinish Heldera, forgive me if I said that wrong, as his son Trey goes to school, with David dropping him off at school with his friend Kyle Christopher. And I like the charisma from Denzel as David drops Trey off at school at the basketball field gym as he chats with the coach. And the cinematography looks very good as director Spike Lee does a good job with the movie. While the shots feel a little repeated, like it's choppy as hell. David picks up Kyle's father, aka his best friend Paul, played by Jeffrey Wright, to drive around the city as the music choices were fine. As a woman sings a song for David, as he hears it goes up to his office, he meets Marisol Cepeda, forgive me if I said that wrong, who will audition for him at the end of the film. And I'll get there when I get there. And David meets his boss, Patrick Bethia, who about having soul versus AI, aka artificial intelligence, in the music business, which is something I'm against. While Patrick believes in AI, while David believes in having soul, and they'll talk about having his own business went down, and he's getting back up, and Patrick says yes to bringing back to business and tells Pam about it as she thinks it's risky. And the dialogue in this is well written by Alan Fox. After David's conversation with Pam, they walk outside and discuss more about how much he loves the music business, as their chemistry is good throughout until David gets a call from someone kidnapping Trey, and he calls Paul out. And they call Kyle, as it happened to be to Paul, as well as they get the cops led by Detective Dylan and others involved in the investigation with her other cops, and they interrogate both parents about getting Trey and Kyle back unharmed. And they send an Amber Alert to find both Trey and Kyle, while the detectives look for both Trey and Kyle. And the premise is fine, but not great as so far. I'm liking the movie, but I just don't like it as much as I want to. The detectives interrogate Coach Strickland about when he last saw Kyle and Trey, until it ends with Officer Bowden and asking Coach Strickland for an autograph, and the exchange is awkward because the other one says he's a Celtics fan. And we move on to David watching the TV about his missing son as well as Paul's. And Paul is interrogated while mocked, and Paul goes to David's office and calls the cops vulturing. And I get why, based on reactions and talks with David about if he needs anything from Paul, as Pam hears Trey has been found but not Kyle quite yet, as Paul gets upset over it and asks if he's detained or being detained. Well, it reminds me of what I see in the news anymore nowadays, as Paul walks away to find out what the fuck happened to Kyle, as Trey explains what ended up happening to Kyle. And this is an upsetting concept for damn sure, as they hear from the kidnapper, who happens to be a rapper named Young Felon, played by ASAP Rocky, acting all tough guy and shit, while David is acting calm about it. And this motherfucker asks for $17.5 million in demand, as this motherfucker is out of his motherfucking mind. But I like the performance by the actors. David and Paul get stressed over the situation, as Paul asks David to pay the $17.5 million While David has to think about paying it over, which makes sense, but at the same time, it doesn't. It is $17.5 million, but at the same time, it's an employee's son's life being in the loophole. As David is interrupted by Patrick, and he advises him to pay the $17.5 million, and he comes with a dilemma between his life and his career. And this is well made by director Spike Lee. As David lays down with Pam, he thinks about paying up. And this is a remake of a Kurosawa film that briefly works, as I've never seen the original, and one day will briefly get there, but it briefly works there. David talks with Trey, as Trey is worried about Kyle, and he's afraid to finish high school because of the situation, as he wants his father to pay the $17.5 million. But he still has to think about it, as Trey disrespects David in his own damn house, and David threatens him, as the acting in this worked for a serious drama/thriller. And David goes outside to talk with Paul about the ransom, as he walks away from David, thinking he's not going to fucking do it, while he asks the famous singers like Stevie Wonder as an example of what he's going to do. And Detective Earl Bridges comes in, and comes into David's office, to ask if he's going to pay the ransom. And David saying keep negotiating with the kidnapper. And the day comes, and David says he's going to pay the ransom said by Trey himself, as they get to sleep for the big day for when they're going to get Kyle out of captivity. And it was some miracle, because this is a serious situation that I've said, works for a drama/thriller while we see Kyle in captivity. And I'm having a okay time with this thus far. The next day comes, and Paul prays they're going to get Kyle out of captivity, as David has all the money and gets the directions to drop it off while on the subway at 11 a.m., as well as a jewel from Pam, while she's willing to sacrifice it. And they pack it up in a Ram Jordan backpack and gets on the subway from Borough Hall and Woodlow, while Detective Bridges has the classic Spike Lee shot while he goes over the plan, as David and Paul get out there to save Kyle's life. And the score in that moment felt pretty misplaced from other Spike Lee joints, as David gets on the subway, Paul riding in a police car in order to see his son again, as the subway gets crowded by a bunch of New York Yankees baseball fans, while they shout out Boston sucks and let's go Yankees, while the subway makes an emergency stop while David is outside the subway. And this is getting intense, as this is not a great film, this is a good film at best. David drops the bag, Kyle is released, and the cops arrest someone on a motorcycle with no money but a bag full of tampons, while David gets off the subway with the Yankees fans, and Detective Bridges walks out with him along with another detective, and young felon gets away with his ransom money, but David doesn't know it yet, while Kyle is sitting on a swing looking banged up, and Kyle gets hospitalized. And David becomes a superhero on the social media, as Kyle is interrogated by the detectives, as David is by Paul's side, and he explains a song young felon made himself, playing over and over again, and it seems specific details for Kyle to remember off the top of his head. And I like how we get mystery behind the kidnapper. David chats with Gabe about how the head of the studio telling him the deal is off, and they demand their money back in the next 2 weeks, as David doesn't feel good about what he did, as it was a good thing to do, and he starts listening to music. And Alex and Gabe have a meeting with David, and they decline his offer after the term of events. He killed a deal that he made earlier in the film, while Alex acts like a fucking asshole about it. And David does the same thing while the tables are turned, and they leave him be, as David goes back to listening to music, as he hears young felon's song, and asks Kyle about if he has something from the lyrics. Hears something from the lyrics, that he explained earlier in the film, and he asks Kyle about it, and he recognizes it as young felon. and Paul recognizes his face. And this reveal is earned, but as this is a little too long, but the moment of the film didn't feel earned in my opinion. David brings Paul with him as Paul brings a gun, and David goes inside his apartment to meet young Felon. And the funny thing is, in his apartment, is he's going to apartment A24, as this was advertised as an A24 picture as well as an Apple Pictures production. And he learns young Felon, or his real name Archie, in which I ain't gonna stick with that, as the studio by his girlfriend. And Paul takes David to the studio, and when they get there, David goes inside the studio to meet young Felon, officially to have a chat with Paul, waiting outside. And the music choices were better choices than the pieces of score Spike Lee has to offer. David talks with young Felon as A$AP Rocky is filled with the N-word. Please don't make me say it, as I'm not a racist motherfucker. And for a rapper, his acting was good, but sometimes a little flat, as, like I said, he uses the N-word constantly, felt distracting at times, until young Felon runs out, and while David sees young Felon shooting at him, and he gets outside and shoots at Paul, and almost escapes as the chase begins, and eventually David catches up to the motherfucker by the subway, as they get in the and go from subway to subway, and David catches you up with young Felon as he jumps down as David and at David, and he has him down and beats up on young Felon, and the detectives get his money back, which felt a little like a relief. Paul is in the hospital, and David, Pam, and Trey visit Paul and Kyle, and with David asking to work for David again as he declines, and everyone gives David and Paul a minute to talk as he eventually walks away, and we move on to a crowd cheering free young Felon as he says he's innocent, when I call bullshit at this point, and he goes to court against David as he requests for David to talk to him. And we see something that I swear to God looked like a music video, but as it turns out, it's an interrogation room with the women pretending to be in the background as young Felon tells David he's becoming more popular thanks to David putting him in prison, as he wants to sign with David, but he says he's leaving his job to create his own music business and agent. And young Felon gets pissed off at him as it starts with the singer Trey, new named Sula Jane Zimi, with her pianist named Ricky, who performed a song called Highest to Lowest, as David and his family are listening to the song, and he makes her his first client, and the climax was beautiful as an ending. But like I said, like The Five Bloods, it's a good movie, not a great movie. But how was this movie good? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 6.3 out of 10. Brooklyn looks beautiful as far as the shots are concerned, and I like the charisma from Denzel, and the cinematography looks very good as director Spike Lee does a good job with the movie, while the shots feel a little repeated, like it's choppy as hell, as the music choices were fine, but I wish this was a better movie than the rating I'm giving it, but sadly it wasn't. And the dialogue in this is very well written by Alan Fox, and the chemistry by Denzel and Elfanish Hedera, forgive me if I said that wrong, was good. The concept is upsetting for damn sure, while it makes sense, but at the same time, it doesn't. But with the performances, I did like by every single actor in this fucking movie, and I went with it as the movie was well made by director Spike Lee. And there are stakes in this movie by all means. There is, and this is a remake of a Kurosawa film that briefly works, but to be fair, I've never seen the original, as I might one day, but this briefly works for a serious drama slash thriller. The score in this felt very misplaced for a Spike Lee joint, while this is, like his previous joint, The Five Bloods, it's not a great film, but it's a good film. And this is a recommendation for the movie for sure, as some scenes are intense, while this is a little too long, but the moment of the reveal was earned in my opinion, and the music choices were better made choices than the score in this whole movie. As well as, I wish I lived it more than I did, but at the end of the day, I liked it as it is. And do I need another remake of this Akira Kurosawa film? No. And I don't. No, I don't. As this was fine as it is. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for the Spike Lee / Denzel collaboration. And until we get another movie, which Lord knows we won't because Denzel's retiring. But until then, show enough, you dig?